This is Mark Gunn Media.
Hit it!
Welcome to GunnShots, Straight from the Hip. I'm your host, Mark Gunn. The views expressed on this program are those of the host and guests and not necessarily reflective of anyone or any entity associated with this broadcast. Welcome to GunnShots, Straight from the Hip. My name is Mark Gunn. And after a little bit of a hiatus, we are back with our 101st episode. Why? Because of something rather significant that took place here in Louisville just a couple of weeks ago. Attorney General Merrick Garland stopped by to give the results that are outlined in this report of his 2-year investigation of the Louisville Metro Police Department and Metro government. That investigation took place over a 2-year period, like I said, because of the death of Breonna Taylor. And here's how that went down.
On April 26, 2021, shortly after I became the Attorney General, I announced that the Justice Department had opened a civil investigation into the Louisville Jefferson County Metro government and the Louisville Metro Police Department. Our investigation sought to determine whether those entities engage in a pattern or practice of violations of the Constitution or federal law. I'm here today to announce the findings of that investigation. I am also announcing that the Justice Department, Louisville Metro, and LMPD have agreed in principle to negotiate toward a consent decree.
The Attorney General went on to describe the nuts and bolts of the investigation.
In 2020, LMPD officers shot and killed Breonna Taylor in her own home in the middle of the night. The officers were executing a search warrant but found no evidence of any crime. In a separate criminal case, we have charged that officers involved in obtaining the warrant knew that the affidavit that supported the warrant contained false and misleading information. Ms. Taylor's death brought immeasurable pain both to her family and to this community. In April 2021, our Civil Rights Division opened the pattern or practice investigation that I've just referenced. Shortly after we opened the investigation, an LMPD leader told the department Breonna Taylor was a symptom of problems that we have had for years. The Justice Department's findings in the report that we are releasing today bear that out. The department has concluded that there is reasonable cause to believe that Louisville Metro and LMPD engaged in a pattern or practice of conduct that violates the First and Fourth Amendments of the Constitution. There is also reasonable cause to believe that they engage in conduct that violates Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Safe Streets Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Specifically, the report finds that LMPD uses excessive force, including unjustified neck restraints and the unreasonable use of police dogs and tasers, conducts searches based on invalid warrants, unlawfully executes warrants without knocking and announcing, unlawfully stops, searches, detains, and arrests people, unlawfully discriminates against black people in enforcement activities, violates the rights of people engaged in protected speech critical of policing, and, along with Louisville Metro, discriminates against people with behavioral health disabilities when responding to them in crisis. The Justice Department has also identified deficiencies in LMPD's response to and investigation of domestic violence and sexual assault. LMPD has relied heavily on pretextual traffic stops in black neighborhoods. In these stops, officers use the pretense of making a stop for a minor traffic offense in order to investigate for other crimes. Some officers have demonstrated disrespect for the people they are sworn to protect. Some have videotaped themselves throwing drinks at pedestrians from their cars, insulted people with disabilities, and called black people monkeys, animal, and boy. This conduct is unacceptable. It is heartbreaking. It erodes the community trust necessary for effective policing and it is an affront to the vast majority of officers who put their lives on the line every day to serve Louisville with honor. And it is an affront to the people of Louisville who deserve better. As the report states, most Metro employees and LMPD officers are dedicated public servants who work hard to promote public safety. But Louisville Metro and LMPD have failed to ensure that all employees uphold the constitutional and statutory rights of the people of Louisville. Louisville Metro and LMPD have also failed to provide police officers and other employees with the support and resources that they need to do their jobs effectively and lawfully. Our investigation uncovered deficient training, substandard facilities and equipment, inadequate support for officer mental health and wellness. Police officers already have difficult jobs. These inadequacies have made those jobs even harder and less safe. Our report also describes unlawful law enforcement practices by LMPD patrol officers and by members of a specialized unit that was first called the Viper Unit. The unit was later rebranded as 9th Mobile Division and the Criminal Interdiction Division. Officers in this specialized unit frequently made pretextual traffic stops in black neighborhoods. Federal and state courts have found that officers in the unit violated residents' Fourth Amendment rights. The report concludes that the unit's activities were part of an overall enforcement approach that resulted in significant and unlawful racial disparities. LMPD's conduct has undermined its public safety mission and strained its relationship with the community it's meant to protect and serve.
He then went on to announce that corrective action would be taken.
In an important step toward reform, I am pleased to announce that the City of Louisville has signed an agreement in principle with the Department of Justice. This agreement commits the city and LMPD to work with the Justice Department, the community, police officers, and other stakeholders to address the problems that we have identified. And this agreement commits us to negotiate a legally binding consent decree with an independent monitor. Louisville Metro and LMPD have already instituted a number of changes through the settlement with the family of Breonna Taylor, as well as through other measures. The city enacted a law that prohibits LMPD from seeking no-knock warrants. A limited pilot program has started sending behavioral health professionals to certain 911 calls, and the city has expanded community-based violence prevention services. LMPD has also announced plans to revamp its training, support for officers' health and wellness, and internal auditing. These efforts are commendable, and we credit Louisville Metro and LMPD for acknowledging that change is necessary. But more must be done. The Justice Department recommends 36 remedial measures that provide a starting framework for changes that are necessary to improve public safety, build community trust, and comply with the Constitution and federal law.
Those recommendations, as far as I'm concerned, are boilerplate at best and can be applied to any police department in the country. But I'll give you a few of what they are according to the report, okay? Number one, enhance use of force policies, reporting, and review procedures. Number two, create and deliver new use of force training. Number three, enhance force-related accountability mechanisms. Number four, improve policies related to confidential informants. Number five, improve policies and training related to search warrant requests. Number six, improve policies and training regarding knocking and announcing during search warrant executions. Number seven, improve policies and training related to confidential informants. Number eight, improve policies and training related to residential search warrant executions. Number nine, implement planning and after-action review processes for residential search warrant executions. Number 10, require consistent activation review of body-worn cameras. Now, these are just 10 of the 30 recommendations that they've made. So in addition to hosting this podcast, I'm also a radio personality for WLOU here in Louisville. We're at 104.7 FM, and we stream at WLOU-FM.com. So I had the opportunity to talk with Louisville Mayor Craig Greenberg and Interim Police Chief Jaqueline Gwinn Villaroel about the press conference.
The People Station, 104.7 WLOU, streaming live at WLOU-FM.com, and we're going to cut right to the chase. So earlier this afternoon, Attorney General Merrick Garland was in town to deliver the findings of an investigation of the Louisville Metro Police Department and Louisville Metro government. This was 2 years in the making. And I told you a little bit ago, we wanted to get a little more in depth as to what's going on. So back in the studio, I've actually threatened to put them on the air on a regular basis. It's in honor of the Mayor, Craig Greenberg, and Chief of Louisville Metro Police Department, Jaqueline Gwinn Villaroel. Good afternoon, folks.
Good afternoon.
How's everybody doing?
We are doing. We are. Today has been, as the days leading up to today have certainly been a challenge for everybody involved in working with the Department of Justice, but today is an important day, a necessary day, that the Department of Justice issue its findings and that we as a community now find ways to move forward together to improve and reform our police department, to strengthen trust with our police, and really strive towards having the most trusted, trained, and transparent police department in America.
And when you took office, this was one of the things that you said that you were looking forward to seeing, because transparency has been a cornerstone of your administration, and we got the findings, and let's be honest, they weren't good.
Well, the chief and I both took our offices on January 2nd.
Right.
And we took office knowing that this investigation was nearing its conclusion, but not knowing what the findings might be. Yet we both took our jobs knowing we would inherit and embrace the opportunity to reform and improve LMPD, and in turn build a safer city, a stronger city together. And so we now have the results of those findings. For very certainly some of the incidents are incredibly difficult to hear about and to read about, but it's important that they're out there so we can move forward.
And Chief, for your part, you've come into a department that was already in flux. We've been through, in the time that I've been here, 3 other police chiefs in the space of maybe 10 or 15 years. 2 of them within a 5 or 6 year period. For any business, that doesn't give you confidence as far as stability is concerned. So from your perspective, coming in at the tail end of this investigation, coming into a department that's already had its challenges, I remember our first conversation and some of the goals that you had in regards to the LMPD. Having been able to see some of the findings, and we'll talk about what some of those are, just a big picture impressions. Were some of these things that you expected to see, maybe some things you weren't expecting? Your first blush when you got the results of the investigation?
Unfortunately, some of the things in the report I was bracing to see because we had intelligence when we first got here to Louisville. There have been some breakdown in supervisory individuals actually providing the skills needed in order to push their officers in the right direction. So when you know that there's a lack of supervision in place, then you know that there's going to be a breakdown in what officers are doing.
And, just in the global scheme of things, there have been people that have been calling for a consent decree for this department for years. Personally speaking, me being one of them, having seen what happened in Cincinnati a few years ago. They were under a federal consent decree. I think they still are, and the changes have been rather profound as far as that department goes. Consent decrees, for the most part, work. So let's talk about what some of the findings were. Among the biggest were the abuse of civil rights and basically police brutality. These are problems that plague a lot of police departments, and the recommendations that the DOJ have set forth, I've had a chance to take a look at the report, and a lot of them are common sense approaches. And I'm sure that you've both taken a look at those as well. Are you seeing anything in that report? And by the way, you can see that report on our Facebook page. We've got a link to it in its entirety. Anything in that report that you agree with, disagree with, or can possibly augment on a local level?
So right now we have just been briefed on the findings. Myself and the mayor, we need to actually review the entire report in its totality. And so for me to be able to give you pretty much a better answer to that, but just by the findings that we've heard or the skeleton list of findings that were listed today, it's disheartening.
Yeah.
And we don't want to hear that. No agency, especially a chief, does not want to hear that officers are operating in a manner that just actually tarnishes the badge. No agency and no CEO of a city wants to hear that. So with that, we're going to be able to digest that report and just see exactly what is going on and what their findings were, and just in detail, in order for us to address some of those concerns.
And Mayor Greenberg, the city was not found without fault as well. There were some findings that Metro government had a little bit of culpability in what's going on. And again, you being a longtime resident and a business owner, you've interacted with the city for years. What are you seeing first blush, first impressions of the report that you saw from the Metro perspective?
Well, as the chief just said, it's difficult to read. And for me, as the mayor of Louisville, whether it's LMPD or the city, ultimately, that's now my responsibility as mayor. And so I accept that we must move forward together. And we, with this day being here, let's move forward. As the chief said, some of their findings, some of their recommendations are around training and supervision. And having the strong leadership of Chief Gwinn Villaroel is critically important. Her and her team are going to be charged with implementing these reforms, hiring the people to do enhanced training, to communicate enhanced policies and stronger policies. These are all things that some of which have already started. The city has taken some steps forward. We have banned no-knock warrants. We've implemented some deflection calls so that when you call 911 and it's more of a behavioral health crisis as opposed to a violent crime emergency, a mental health professional can be discharged. We need to expand that program. We need to make it citywide. We need to expand the hours. So we have been preparing to do a lot of things. We need to implement those. We know the community is calling for action, and they will begin to see that action under the chief and my leadership.
So we've got the findings. The agreement is already in place to begin working with the Department of Justice. Just from an average citizen's point of view, what does that look like, or what's next? Now that you've got the findings, you're going to have time to digest them. What are the next steps following your...
Yeah, I'll just briefly say on that so we agreed when the department reached out to us and gave us a confidential briefing on their findings. There were many options that we had as to what we could do. We decided we wanted to cooperate and collaborate with the Department of Justice to begin immediately, continuing to implement reforms, continuing our efforts to improve LMPD. And so that's that. So today what we signed was an agreement in principle, a 2-page document where we acknowledge their findings and we commit to negotiating in good faith towards a consent decree, which would be a much longer document that spells out in specificity what reforms we've both agreed to undertake, and that would be under the supervision of a federal judge. So that will take months to negotiate. However, let me be clear. The chief and I and our teams, we're not waiting. We've already started, and we're going to continue to work every day on reforms and improvement to make LMPD a police department that everyone in our city is proud of.
One last question, because I know you are pressed for time. One of the concerns that you are most likely going to hear would be pushback from the union. How are you prepared to deal with that?
With that, having just truly open dialogue with the president of the union, understanding that we, again, when I said necessary parties coming together collectively and collaborating collectively, that's everybody. There's everybody who has a vested interest in making sure the Louisville Police Department is a premier department. So everybody needs to be at the table and have that mindset that we want the best for our officers and we want the best for our citizens of this great city. They deserve that. And so I'm hopeful. I'm very optimistic. And I'm putting it on air today for you. I'm very optimistic that all minds will come together and we will be on the same page because we want a great department.
In conclusion, it is my firm belief that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act must be passed, and that the reforms that AG Garland spelled out don't go nearly far enough. Now, this is an issue that I've looked at before, and I came up with my own list of reforms that need to be included in order for any real reform to take place. For instance, training needs to be standardized because training in departments all over the country is different from one to the next. What works for one department should be standard for every department. The fact that it takes longer to become a barber than it does a police officer is unacceptable. A minimum of a master's degree in policing, in criminology, must be had by any potential police officer. And there must be at least 2 years of academy training before you even see the inside of a precinct. As part of any real reform, steps must be taken to rid the LMPD and every other department of any racists or white supremacists or anyone whose beliefs align with white supremacy. Look at it this way. Police departments were founded as slave patrols, and it's obvious that a lot of that mindset still exists. Legislation was introduced to try to rid departments of racists, but it was shot down because of a Republican Congress. Psychological evaluations must be taken every 6 months as part of a recertification that goes along with weapons training as well. Officers convicted of any wrongdoing at any level will not only lose their jobs, but they will lose their pensions, and they'll also be added to a federally controlled national database that will prevent them from working in any other police department in the country. These are part of the reforms that I came up with once again. In the case of any lawsuits, the officer's bond will be targeted as any part of a restitution. That also goes for the pension. Individual officers should be financially liable for their wrongdoing. The taxpayers should no longer bear the burden of these lawsuits. Now, until more substantial and concrete measures are put into place, these reforms that Attorney General Garland spelled out are nothing more than window dressing. They're nothing more than putting an unruly child into timeout. And we're going to continue to see malfeasance and misconduct on the part of not only the LMPD, but other police departments across the country.
You've been listening to Gunshots Straight from the Hip. The views expressed are those of the host and guests and not reflective of any business entity or anyone associated with this broadcast. If you have any comments or want more information on how to be a sponsor, log on to our website at markgunmedia.com or call us at 502-407-0283. That's 502-407-0283. Thank you for listening.
Mark Gun Media. No hype, no hoopla, just damn good work.